HOA officer climbed my fence without consent. Grandpa had it electrified for trespassers. They say fences make good neighbors. But in this town, fences are battlegrounds, especially when you're not part of the HOA. I'm Ben McAllister, 34, quiet guy, software developer. Moved back to my grandfather's land last spring after he passed. It's 46 acres of old pine, wild pasture, and a handmade farmhouse that groans when the wind runs too fast through its beams. To me, it's paradise. To the wrong neighbors, it's opportunity. I didn't expect drama. I didn't know the name Karen Dunbridge then, or what her HOA, which, to be clear, I was never a member of, was capable of. My grandpa, Roy, built that fence after the Carter brothers tried to poach on our land in '92. I was only a kid, but I remember him welding parts of it himself, calling it the line. He strung wire around the perimeter and connected it to a simple livestock electric current. Not deadly, just a sharp zap enough to teach someone respect. He put up a big sign, private property, electrified fence, do not enter. Trespassers will be prosecuted and possibly humiliated. It was part joke, part warning. Grandpa had a sense of humor, but he didn't play games with trespassers. The fence was still there when I moved back in. The wiring still lived. I maintained it out of tradition, not malice. For the first few months, it was quiet. I rebuilt the back barn, revived the garden, even cleaned out Grandpa's old moonshine shack. I'd wave to a few neighbors walking by, mostly retirees from the cul-de-sac development across the creek, and kept to myself. Until the letters started. The first was handwritten in thick cursive. The paper smelled like lavender and vinegar. Dear Mr. McAllister, we notice that your fencing is not in compliance with HOA standards and must be reviewed. Kindly remove electric components and schedule a site inspection. Karen Dunbridge, Vice President, Briarwood Lakeside HOA. I laughed. Then I checked the envelope. Wrong address, I wasn't in Briarwood. My property was outside their platted subdivision. Always had been. So, I ignored it. Then came the visits. A knock. Middle of the day. I was soldering solar panel cables on the porch. Hi, I'm Karen, said the woman in the pink blazer. She had a clipboard and judgment in her eyes. I'm with the HOA. I leaned back and said, I'm not. She chuckled like I was slow. Well, technically, you're adjacent to our community, and per the latest redistricting, I cut her off. No redistricting covers me. My land's been McAllister owned since 1897. Not part of any HOA. Never signed in. Never will. She looked offended. But you benefit from our shared roads and security patrols. You mean the county roads, and the guy who sits in a golf cart outside your tennis courts. Karen pursed her lips like she'd just eaten a lemon. That was the beginning of the Cold War. I figured it would blow over, but the letters escalated. Demands to comply with community standards. Complaints about my unsightly equipment, which, I assume, referred to my rain catchers and satellite antenna. One even accused me of intimidating landscaping. Then she crossed the line. Literally, it happened one humid Tuesday in July. I was at the hardware store in town when my motion sensors pinged my phone. Someone was in the back field. Near the fence, I checked the security feed. A woman in slacks and a neon safety vest was scaling the fence behind my tool shed. And then a pop, a spark, a scream. She flailed, dropped like a sack of laundry, then scrambled to her feet and ran limping toward the woods. I paused the footage and zoomed in. It wasn't just some rogue neighbor. It was Karen's assistant, the HOA secretary. My phone rang an hour later. Unknown number. This is Karen Dunbridge, the voice shrieked before I could speak. Your booby-trapped property injured my assistant. I'm calling the sheriff and pressing charges. You're a danger to this community, I said 3 words. She climbed my fence. Silence. Then more screaming. Then the line went dead. When Deputy Frank showed up that evening, he didn't come to arrest me. He asked to see the footage. I showed him. He chuckled. He knew Grandpa Roy, knew that fence, Looks like Karen's crew didn't read the sign. He said, "You're in the clear, Ben." But the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the end of that week, the tension was so thick in the air I could chew it. Karen didn't send more letters, not directly. Instead, new tactics emerged, subtle but calculated, like guerrilla warfare wrapped in HOA stationery. It started with a fake road sign on a foggy Monday morning. I noticed something strange at the north entrance to my land, the dirt road that winds through the tree line near an old Civil War marker. There, as bold as brass and just as misplaced, stood a fresh green and white sign, Private Briarwood Maintenance Zone. HOA monitored trespassers will be cited. My jaw clenched. That land was 100% on my parcel. I pulled out my phone and opened the GIS app with the county overlays. Yup, the sign was at least 200 feet inside my property line. And it wasn't even installed properly. They'd nailed it to a crepe myrtle tree with a state park trail screw. Not legal, not permitted, not even close to real, but it was psychological warfare. They wanted my neighbors to see that sign and assume I was part of them, that their jurisdiction reached here, that their fake authority extended its tentacles across my legacy. I yanked the sign down with both hands, snapped the metal post across my knee, and tossed the fragments in the back of my truck. I should have stopped there, but Grandpa didn't raise me to take things lying down. I spent that night digging through our deed records, pulling county plat maps, and scanning old letters. My cousin Joe, who works for the land commissioner's office, found something golden buried in a public zoning database, a proposed boundary adjustment from 2016. It had been submitted but never approved. It was a request from Maple Ridge Development Co., the same developer who created Briarwood. They had requested to replat part of Grandpa's land into the Briarwood Greenbelt. The application was signed by Karen Dunbridge. As a consultant, boom! That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just a nosy HOA vice president. She was involved in the real estate development game. This wasn't just about fences or pool sizes or lawn paint. This was about expansion, power, money. They wanted our land piece by piece, and since they couldn't buy it from Grandpa, and I refused to sell, they were trying to absorb it through bullying, signs, and slow manipulation. I started documenting everything. Every incident, every false letter, every visit. I created a Dropbox folder and shared it with Joe. I needed to get ahead of whatever Karen was planning, but the next punch didn't come from Karen. It came from the county zoning office. A week later, I received a notice of violation. Apparently, someone had reported me for unpermitted fencing with potential electrical hazard and non-compliance with neighborhood fire code. This was no accident. I drove straight to the zoning office and demanded to speak with the clerk. They let me see the complaint file. The handwriting was familiar, thin cursive, lavender scented. Karen again. I was furious, but I didn't blow up. Not yet. Instead, I filed a counter-complaint with proof. Joe helped me submit aerial photos, historic plats, and even Grandpa's notarized boundary affidavit from 2002. We tagged it all under attempted property annexation via fraudulent HOA representation. I also filed a public complaint with the state HOA Oversight Committee, but that wasn't enough. I needed more than paperwork. I needed people. That evening, I went door to door, not to every house in Briarwood, just the ones bordering the edge of my property. People who might have believed the signs. People who might have thought Karen's reach was real. I brought a copy of the deed, let them see it, showed them the photo of Karen's assistant trespassing and getting zapped, explained how the fence had been here longer than the HOA had existed. Most were polite. Some apologized. A few shook my hand and thanked me. Then came Miguel. He was 57, a retired fire captain. His house backed up right to the corner of my pasture. Karen tried the same thing with me last year, he said, pulling up an email on his phone. Claimed I needed HOA approval to repaint my shed. I'm not in the HOA either. I leaned in. Do you still have the notice? He nodded. Filed it in a drawer. That was it. Karen had a pattern. She'd done this before, tried to annex properties by pretending authority she didn't have. I asked Miguel if he'd go on record. He agreed. So did 4 others. I started a quiet little revolution, not loud, not public, not yet, just a foundation of resistance. But Karen must have sensed the shift, because that weekend, the line was crossed in a way I didn't see coming. I woke up Sunday to find a fresh tire track gouged through my back pasture. It wasn't a car, it was a golf cart with HOA decals, and behind it a brand new temporary fence post, staked in my soil, wrapped in plastic HOA flags. They were expanding their greenbelt. Again. And this time, they weren't asking. The morning they drove that temporary fence post into my pasture was the morning I stopped playing nice. I stood on my porch at 6:43 a.m., coffee still steaming in my hand, staring across the dew-covered grass at a line of plastic flags fluttering in the wind, pink and green, HOA colors, strung between cheap fiberglass poles like some kind of suburban conquest marker. A Briarwood HOA golf cart was parked beside it, half in the ditch, its rear bumper still warm. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. They were staking claim. Again. And this time, I saw it happen. On camera. I rewound the footage and watched it play out at 2:21 a.m. Headlights. A golf cart. Karen herself driving. She stepped out, glanced around, then planted the flags like she was claiming a new moon. No clipboard, no permits, no calls. Just entitlement. I didn't call her. I called my cousin Joe at the land commissioner's office, and I drove straight to the county courthouse. I wasn't just filing complaints anymore. I was filing suit. That's when things escalated fast. Within 48 hours, I received an official-looking envelope. Heavy paper, gold embossed seal, inside notice of HOA realignment and property inclusion approval, recorded with County Deed Office, effective immediately. Lot number 47, McAllister Tract shall be administered under Briarwood Lakeside, HOA. Signed Karen Dunbridge, VP certified by Leland T. Harris, Registrar. I blinked. Leland T. Harris, I knew that name. He was the former registrar. He retired in 2021. This document was dated last month. I checked the certification stamp, a poor Photoshop job. I held it up to the light. The seal didn't even align with the signature. It was a fake, a clumsy, dangerous, desperate fake. I scanned it, highlighted inconsistencies, and handed the whole mess over to a county lawyer. Joe knew a guy named Tyler. Smart, detail-obsessed. The kind of man who once had a neighbor arrested for repainting a fire hydrant. Tyler confirmed it, fraudulent HOA filing. That changed everything. Now, it wasn't just trespassing. It wasn't just harassment. It was attempted land theft using forged documentation. Karen had committed a felony, and she didn't even know I knew yet. I didn't go to the police. I went straight to the civil court clerk and filed for a temporary injunction. Tyler helped me draft the language to halt any physical incursion, representation, or signage by Briarwood Lakeside, HOA, upon parcel 01019AC004, pending legal review. It was approved within 24 hours. We served it the next morning. By noon, the sheriff himself showed up at Karen's front porch, white siding, potted geraniums, a flag that said, "Good vibes only." She opened the door in a pastel jumpsuit and nearly dropped her glass of orange juice when he handed her the papers. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was what happened 2 weeks later. We got a court date, real court, in front of a real judge. Not mediation, not a friendly sit-down, not a coffee clatch with a board of nosy retirees. Judge Beckett was a sharp woman in her early 60s with no patience for games. I knew we had a shot the moment she narrowed her eyes at the forged document. "This," she said, holding it up like a rotten fish, "is laughable. Who submitted this Karen, dressed like she was attending a charity brunch? Stood up. Your Honor, that's a certified inclusion notice. We simply, who is we?" "Ms. Dunbridge," the judge snapped. "Are you part of county government?" Karen looked confused. "No. I'm vice president of," "Then explain," the judge said slowly, "why your name appears on a document pretending to be a deed modification with the name of a man who hasn't worked for this county in 3 years? Silence. Karen turned red. I handed the judge my folder, 43 pages, all documented, footage, maps, the original land deed, the fence schematics, and testimonies from Miguel, from 3 other neighbors, and a notarized affidavit from the actual county registrar. Beckett read them for nearly 10 minutes. When she looked back up, her voice was like a guillotine. Ms. Dunbridge, you will remove all flags, signage, and any reference to Mr. McAllister's land in your HOA filings. Immediately, you will cease all communication with him, his neighbors, and county offices on his behalf. You will issue a written apology within 10 days. Karen opened her mouth. And, the judge added, you're being reported to the district attorney for attempted fraudulent recordation of real estate documents. Karen froze. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered furiously into her ear. She sat down. The gavel hit the bench. Case closed. I walked out of the courthouse lighter than I'd felt in a year. Karen didn't look at me as she passed. Her jaw was set like granite. Her cheeks flushed. Her world had shrunk back down to its rightful size. The flags disappeared the next morning. The golf cart vanished from the road. But the best part, neighbors started dropping by, quietly, with apologies, with pie, with questions. Some were angry, not at me, at Karen, because the truth had leaked out, and what Karen had done to me, she'd done to others, quietly, slowly, over years. Some people had given up sections of land without even knowing they had rights. Now, they were fighting back. The silence after the courtroom verdict didn't last long. At first, it was just relief. Peace. A weekend with no new letters, no phony signs, no midnight intrusions. But by Monday, the news had spread faster than I expected. Miguel told his cousin, who told her bridge group, which included 2 former HOA treasurers and a retired paralegal. The paralegal, a silver-haired woman named Gloria, dropped the hammer. Karen's been misusing HOA funds for years. She told us at a backyard get-together, she expends $200 in consulting fees to a landscaping vendor that doesn't exist. Look at the board minutes. It's all there. She had copies, detailed ones. That's when the residents stopped being afraid and started asking questions. They came to me in groups. I got a letter saying my back patio was out of compliance. I live outside the covenant map. Can they even do that? They fined me for cutting a tree without approval, but the tree was diseased, and I own the land. Karen told us she'd spoken to the city about rerouting the creek path. Is that even legal? I pulled out my folder. It had grown since the trial. Now it was a full-on dossier evidence. Photos, maps, timelines. People began contributing to it. Neighbors brought receipts, screenshots, letters. One guy even had a voicemail from Karen threatening to report him for unauthorized driveway expansion. It wasn't a homeowners association anymore. It was a protection racket. So I decided to host a community meeting, not at the HOA clubhouse, not in any official space, at the local fire hall, public, neutral, and protected. I didn't expect more than 20 people. 83 showed up. Miguel brought folding chairs. Gloria brought a projector. Tyler, my cousin's lawyer friend, agreed to answer questions. And I stood up front with a blown-up map of the Briarwood subdivision showing the real boundaries, the legal parcels, and who was actually part of the HOA and who wasn't. Dozens of jaws dropped. People who thought they had no choice but to pay Karen. Turns out they'd never signed anything. They'd just been told they were grandfathered in. Others had paid hundreds in fines for rules that didn't exist, violations Karen simply invented. By the end of that meeting, we had 15 official statements, 7 refund requests, and a vote to audit the entire HOA ledger. That's when the tide broke. Karen tried to strike back. 2 days later, she emailed the Briarwood mailing list claiming the community meeting was unauthorized and legally non-binding. She warned that participants might be fined or face future voting privilege limitations. But the dam was broken. We forwarded that email to the state HOA regulatory office. We also posted it publicly on Nextdoor, Facebook, and the County Transparency Forum. Dozens of comments poured in. Outrage, betrayal, calls for accountability. And then someone leaked a bombshell. A former board member, anonymously, posted the full financial spreadsheet for the past 3 years. It was damning. $700 listed as holiday lighting consultant paid to Karen's niece. $100 to community relations hospitality, a catering company Karen's best friend owned. $8,000 paid to outdoor improvement advisory, no invoice, no recipient listed. It was enough to trigger an emergency recall vote. The next 2 weeks were a blur. Flyers, emails, phone calls, door-to-door canvassing. Everyone was furious, not just about the money, about the lies, the forged document, the fence, the trespassing, the bullying. We pushed for a full board re-election with independent monitors, no internal review, no secret ballots. Karen tried to fight it. She called it a witch hunt, claimed we were instigating division, but the votes were clear. 91% voted to dissolve the current board. Karen was ousted, her co-conspirators gone, the HOA treasurer under investigation, the fake consulting invoices flagged for fraud. And the best part, several residents banded together to form a new volunteer council with clear rules, no overreach, and total transparency. We weren't against structure. We were against tyranny disguised as structure. I'll never forget the day the final motion passed. Karen wasn't even there. She'd moved out quietly the night before a moving truck parked at 6 m. Her front porch cleared of its signs and roses and little welcome to the HOA placard. Her house was put up for sale the next day, at a reduced rate, but the story didn't end with Karen. It ended with us, with people who had been isolated and intimidated suddenly looking at one another like neighbors again. I saw folks shaking hands, helping each other install legal fencing, painting their garages without fear of citations. Grandpa's land still standing, still protected, that fence still hot. Only now, it didn't have to be, because the community no longer feared a made-up crown. They'd burn the throne to the ground. They say when you dig in for a fight, you never know who's watching. In my case, the whole county was. When the dust finally settled in Briarwood after the court rulings, the community revolt, the leaked documents, and Karen's silent midnight escape, something bigger started taking root. My little war over a fence had blossomed into something else. A movement, and I never saw it coming. It started with a phone call. Tyler, the county attorney who helped me file the injunction, rang me up on a Tuesday morning. His voice was clipped, focused. You've got people asking to talk to you. Media people, state oversight people. A nonprofit in Atlanta wants to document your story for an HOA reform campaign. I laughed. What? Because I stopped a Karen from stealing a cow pasture. No, he said, because you proved they can be stopped. That hit me. Because deep down, that's what had kept so many of us quiet for so long, the belief that these petty tyrants couldn't be challenged. That fake power was still power, if everyone just bowed to it. But now people were waking up. 2 weeks after Karen moved out, I was invited to speak at a community roundtable in a neighboring town, Whitley Ridge, where residents were also fighting a rogue HOA board. Their complaints mirrored ours: bogus fines, mysterious spending, land boundary manipulations. I brought my folder, my maps, my court documents, and I stood in a little library rec room, folding chairs packed with folks who looked tired but hopeful, and I told them everything. The court fight, the forgery, the golf cart trespassing, even the electrified fence my grandpa had warned me about since I was a boy. By the end, a retired police chief stood up and said, "We've got work to do." That night, they started their own HOA audit. 2 months later, their board was gone. Things snowballed. A regional newspaper ran an expose on Karen's fake filings. Turns out she had tried similar moves in 2 previous communities. She'd never faced consequences before. She'd just moved on and reinvented herself somewhere else. Not this time. With a public record of court judgments and a growing digital trail of her actions, Karen was effectively blacklisted from any leadership position, tied to community management in the state. A watchdog group flagged her name on a national list of HOA violators, and more people began sharing their stories. In online forums, town halls, and even TikTok videos, folks described their Karens, petty tyrants in polos and clipboards who thought a title gave them dominion over truth, and for once, they were being believed. Back in Briarwood, the transformation was dramatic. The new community council, a volunteer, rotating body, posted all budgets publicly. There were no fines, just recommendations. All changes to common areas had to be approved by a supermajority of residents, not just the council. They even wrote a resolution banning any future attempt to absorb private land without notarized, recorded consent. As for me, well, I finally got to rebuild the north fence line the way my grandpa always wanted, not barbed, not electrified, just honest cedar posts, carved by hand, with a single brass plaque screwed to the center post. It read, "Private property, protected by the people neighbors came by to help me stain the wood." One even brought lemonade. It didn't feel like a fence anymore. It felt like a promise. I got one final letter from Karen. It wasn't an apology, just a half-hearted threat of an appeal that never materialized. I didn't respond. Her power was gone. Her noise was just noise. But one quiet Saturday, I did walk up to the fence and take a picture of the field, the sunrise, the place where a plastic HOA flag once fluttered like a lie in the wind. And I posted it online with a simple caption: "We stopped a fraud. You can, too." It went viral. Today, I still live on the same land. I still walk the same fields. And now, when I pass that fence, I smile not because I won, but because we did. Me, Miguel, Gloria, even the guy who once threatened to fine me over my barn paint, but ended up helping me install solar lights. Because when good people finally stop being afraid, when they stand up, speak out, and say no more, the entire game changes. We prove that HOAs, fake or otherwise, only have the power we give them. And once we take it back, they crumble. Have you ever faced abuse of power in your community, been silenced by fear, or pressured by a false sense of authority? You're not alone. Share your story. Speak your truth. Stand with your neighbors, because fences don't divide us. Silence does, and sometimes standing your ground is the most powerful thing you can do.